the Everything But Politics podcast.
Let's do it. Welcome back to the Everything But Politics podcast. Joining us is Drew Manning, personal trainer, best-selling author, and host of the Fit2Fat2Fit Experience podcast. Drew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Yes,
Welcome.
honor. So Drew, looking back, throughout your content, throughout your podcast, throughout really everything you've created the last decade and a half, I'm curious, who was Drew Manning before he was a trainer, before the camera was on, before he was what we see now throughout social media?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. There's, these who I was before Fit2Fat2Fit took off was a completely different version of myself. I grew up in a family of 11 brothers and sisters. We all played sports growing up. So football and wrestling were the two sports that I grew up playing. I grew up very religious. I grew up mostly in California, but also part of my life in Virginia. I was always active. I was always fit. I was always in shape. That was a part of my lifestyle ever since I was a young kid, like watching, movies that you guys probably didn't watch in the 1980s, like Predator and Conan the Barbarian with like Arnold Schwarzenegger and stuff. So I've always had like a love for health and fitness. But yeah, before Fit2Fat2Fit, I worked full-time as a financial analyst. Then I transitioned into the medical field and worked full-time as a neuro monitoring technician. And then before I did that job, I got certified as a personal trainer. And that's where my journey in the fitness industry started, even though it's very slow. Started taking on clients on the side, like as a part-time job, while I had the full-time job in the medical field. And then I think around that time I was living in Utah. So that's a little bit of me in a nutshell before Fit2Fat2Fit.
And Drew, you've been in the fitness industry for so long, and you're one of the few people who have experienced being fat and being super strong and ripped. What's harder, getting into shape or being out of shape?
They're both hard in their own ways. And what I mean by that, so when I did Fit2Fat2Fit, just briefly, we'll talk about it, but basically becoming overweight for the first time in my life, I'll be totally honest with you guys, it created a little bit of an identity crisis for me where I kind of had a freak out moment or moments putting on the weight. Cause you have to understand my whole entire life, I was, in shape, fit, ripped, all that stuff. And then all of a sudden to put on 75 pounds in 6 months was very, very uncomfortable. And I remember wanting to go up to strangers in public and explain to them that I wasn't really this overweight person, that I was normally this fit guy. I wanted to show people my before picture so that they knew what I looked like, because I was so uncomfortable being overweight for the first time. And it was a mind trip, to be honest with you. But it taught me a lot of lessons. So getting in shape or being in shape is hard in the sense of being disciplined and having willpower and, being consistent.
Yeah.
So that for some people is hard, especially when they deal with, the mental and emotional side of transformation. And we can get into that and why, in my opinion, I have so much empathy for those people that struggle with weight loss. So for a lot of people, it's really hard. But to be overweight, shoot, man, like and to be unhealthy the way I was really hard mentally as well. Health wise, all kinds of like physical kind of ailments that come from eating all the processed junk food that you want and not exercising and not being disciplined. So both of them are hard in their own ways.
Yeah.
But they both taught me very valuable lessons.
Yeah, totally. And, you began this, like we said, 10, 15 years ago before Ozempic, right? So now we have a lot of these people looking for the easy way out. If someone listening to this is dealing with that tough, difficult to lose weight, they are, chronically obese, why shouldn't they take the easy route? And why should they, pursue the difficult fitness, eating well, and just trying to get their life on track through natural remedies?
That's a really good question. And I'll give my honest answer about that whole situation, because you make a good point of like, why shouldn't they just take the easy way out? we live in a world today where we're always looking for the easy way out. Let's be honest with you. You're always looking for a drug or supplement or an exercise hack that can kind of, expedite the process because, we're humans. We're biologically wired to seek comfort. And so doing hard things like being disciplined with exercise and being disciplined with your diet are uncomfortable, hard, things for a lot of people that are required in order to get in shape. And that whole hard work mentality, for some people just turns them off and they're like, that's too hard for me. Right. And that's why we have a lot of people that really don't care about their health and fitness. The only thing that I'll say though, really quick about Ozempic is I'm actually okay with some people using it because for them, that might be the thing that ultimately forces them to restrict calories. And because I've never taken it, but I've heard what it's like to take it and there's zero appetite, kind of nauseous all the time. And as a result, you're not going to eat enough calories. But the problem is if you go off of it, guess what? Your behavior hasn't changed. Your mindset hasn't changed. So most likely if you get off of it, you're going to go back to, desiring food and have an appetite again and eat more food and gain the weight back probably. So what I prefer people do is I'm okay with using it as a shortcut, but don't skip the mental and emotional mindset that is required to shift your behavior and shift your mindset about health and fitness, so that it doesn't just become a short term quick trick to lose weight, but more of a long term lifestyle change, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So with the lifestyle change and impacting mindset, the only real way to influence that is through effort. So seeing whatever you see in the mirror is cool, but the only way to shift your headspace is by putting in the both physical and mental work. Is that what you're saying here?
Yeah, pretty much. There has to be some type of not just physical transformation, which is going to require changing your diet, changing your exercise, getting adequate amounts of sleep, and focusing on the physical side. But to shift your mindset, I mean, that's where my approach to health and fitness is so different than everyone else out there, because everyone just focuses on the physical aspects of weight loss, right? Calories, macros, supersets, cardio, these types of things that we know are important in the fitness industry, but that's not what most humans struggle with. It's the mental and emotional hurdles that they have to overcome. So that can, stretch back to things like trauma as a child that, are really hard to overcome, but are going to be required. Because here's what happens is when humans try and go through a physical transformation, let's take your average 30-year-old, mom or dad. They've gained like 50 pounds over the years just because they've let themselves go. And now they're like, all right, I'm going to lose some weight. I'm going to cut out all the sugar. I'm going to willpower my way through this. What happens is that they don't factor in that they're emotional creatures. Like all humans, we have emotions, and those emotions kind of dictate our behaviors when it comes to whether or not we're going to eat ice cream and pizza, or we're going to, stay consistent and eat the chicken and broccoli, or we're going to get up early and go to the gym, or we're going to sleep in and miss the workout, right? It's dictated by your emotional states. So if you're, a 30-year-old mom or dad, you're struggling with finances, you're struggling with your marriage, you're struggling with your kids and your job and all these things, these pressures that build up, you look for ways, like I said, we're biologically wired to seek comfort. So that person most likely is looking for comfort through, and unfortunately, food, drugs, and alcohol are three easy escapes to just go gravitate towards because they're so accessible. They taste freaking good. I mean, let's be honest with you. When I did Fit2Fat2Fit and I was eating all those junk foods, I know firsthand those foods make you feel better. Like when you're in a stressed out moment and, having pizza and ice cream just to kind of relieve your stress, people get addicted to that. Just like someone that's an alcoholic will get addicted to having a drink after work, or maybe 2 drinks and then 3, and they need that to kind of lower their stress levels. And same thing with recreational drugs. For some people, they'll use that as an escape. And so this is what the struggle is someone can have all the willpower and discipline in the world and best intentions to lose weight. But if they don't fix their behaviors and their patterns of okay, when I'm stressed out, I reach for the alcohol, or I reach for the food. And if it's just in their cupboard or their pantry, most likely they're going to have a moment of weakness where it's just oh, it's so easy just to give in. And then before you know it, then they shame themselves and guilt themselves into, oh, why did I do that? I'm such a failure. I hate myself. And then it creates self-sabotage behavior where then they binge eat, And then the next day or on Monday, they're like, all right, now I'm going to start over again and try and do it again. But life, will throw you curveballs, and like you're going to have stresses. So if you don't have tools to help you overcome those mental and emotional hurdles, it's not going to become a lifestyle change. It's just going to be a quick little diet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, Drew, I want to talk a little bit about diet compared when you were doing the unhealthy food. We all know what not to eat, the Oreos, the pizza. What was your diet getting back in shape? Like if you're someone right now who's out of shape, what diet would you recommend for them for the next 6 months?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I like to keep it simple as possible. And for me, as long as you're focusing on mostly whole foods, so like 80 to 90% of your diet comes from whole foods. I don't care if you're vegan or paleo or keto or carnivore, get rid of the processed junk food as much as possible. Even though it's cheaper, and it can be cheaper, and it's, very delicious and, it's very convenient. As long as you're eating mostly whole foods, and I would say eating an adequate amount of protein and fiber, you should be good to go. Like for the most part, overall health. Now, if you want to get into specifics, like hiring a coach to help you with specific macros and calorie count, that is also beneficial, but not everyone has access to that. But if you just stuck with high quality proteins, like mostly I would say animal protein is a little bit, easier, more easily accessible for most people. So high quality animal proteins, healthy fats like avocados and olive oil, salmon, omega-3 fatty acids, things like that. And then healthy carbohydrates, for me, things like fruits and vegetables are the way to go instead of breads, rice and grains and cereals. I recommend mostly fruits and vegetables as your source of carbohydrates. And if you stick to that type of a diet, most likely you're not going to overeat chicken and broccoli to where you're gaining weight, eating too much chicken and broccoli. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Totally. So when you were putting on all this weight and physically noticing a difference, were you ever say to yourself, Drew, what are you doing? What did I get myself into? This is not how I want. I mean, I was trying to prove a point, but now it's kind of past that. I feel like shit. I look like shit. What was that like for you?
I had a few of those moments, and I'll bring you back to one of them. And it's when I was on the Dr. Oz show. So I did Dr. Oz when I was at my fattest, right? And he did all this blood work on me and all these tests, and we went over the results on his show. And I think that was one of the moments where I was like, shit, I'm 75 pounds overweight. And it's not a bulking thing. I want to make sure everyone understands that this isn't like a typical bodybuilder bulking diet, because I wasn't exercising at all. So literally all those 75 pounds were pure fat. None of that was muscle. So I remember on the Dr. Oz show, like, man, what if I get stuck? And I had all these doubts, like, what if I'm stuck here? What if I can't lose the weight? Like, what's going to happen? And I had all these fears come up because I've never done this before. And I was like, all these people are watching me now from being on all these TV shows. And then now I'm like, I hope that I can deliver and walk the walk. But yeah, dude, it was a mind trip for sure. Just like being 75 pounds heavier, having a belly where I could like set a drink on and it would just chill there, and and I would always find myself resting underneath my man boobs and on my belly like this because it was kind of comfortable. I'm like, man, I've never experienced that before. So yeah, there was a couple moments like that where I was like, dude, what am I doing? Like this is insane.
Yeah. So I'm proud to say I've never been fat, and I don't plan on ever being fat. But when you are 70 pounds overweight and you do lose it, where does that weight go?
Like, where does the fat go?
Yeah. Where does it physically go? I'm curious. Where does it go?
What I understand, the whole process is kind of mysterious for a lot of people, but what I've learned is it leaves the body through the breath. As your body breaks down the fat in the body, you're in a caloric deficit. I don't know the exact science. I couldn't tell you the exact science, but what I remember from researching this years ago was that it's expelled from the body through the breath. So that doesn't mean like the more you breathe, the more fat you lose. But when your body breaks down the fat, it's released through you breathing out into the air. So, but
that's fascinating.
Exactly. But yeah, it's not like you just poop it out or something like that.
Well,
No.
that's what I was thinking. You either poop it out or pee it out or sweat it out, with a sauna. But that's the breath is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can look more into it, or you guys can look into it if you want to like know more about the science behind it. But anyways, you have to be in a caloric deficit. That's the biggest thing that, I'm a big proponent of quality food, not just quantity, like calories in, calories out. But you have to be in a caloric deficit if you're going to want to lose fat.
Drew, I want to talk a little bit. You posted today on your story about would people join you for a 3-day fast? When you talk about a 3-day fast, would that just be water? You include salt, anything else?
Yeah, so I do these longer extended fasts different. I've done all kinds of different types of fasts. Typically, my go-to one is water, coffee, tea, and salt, and that's kind of like what I stick with. Although sometimes I will have like a diet soda or 0 calorie, drink of some kind every once in a while, just to mix it up to feel like I'm having something. So I'm okay with stuff like that. But like the goal is to not have any, like coffee has minimal amount of calories, maybe like 10 or 15.
Mhm.
So I don't get too strict about that. But yeah, that's kind of like typically how I do my fast is just water, coffee, and tea for the most part.
And what kind of benefits have you seen from I've done like a 30-hour fast a couple weeks ago and definitely felt a little lighter, but 3 days seems like a long time to go on fasting.
I've done upwards of 7 days. That's the longest fast I've ever
Wow.
done. And I've learned a lot about fasting over the years. Now, here's what I'll say about fasting. It's not a miracle. It's not like this easy, quick way to. Well, you will lose weight on it, but it's not like you can't fast more, and be successful with losing weight because eventually you'll lose muscle, and then eventually you'll die if you don't eat
Yeah.
eventually. So it's one of those things you have to be careful with. For me, the benefits of fasting, in my opinion, is yes, there are physical health benefits like longevity, autophagy, when you are fasting. And for me, it's a break from my digestive system. That's the thing I like
Yes.
about the fact that the mental discipline of being able to go without food and know that you're going to be okay. Like I said, that 7 day fast that I did was like a testament to me of like, damn, my body is capable of so much more than I ever thought. I never
Were you
thought it would.
working out as you were doing a 7-day fast?
The only thing I would do is go for a walk.
Okay.
Uh, you know, days 1 and 2 were the hardest. Days 3, 4, and 5, you reach this level of euphoria that I will say is kind of like it's like you're a little bit elevated or high, if you will, not like high from drugs, but a different kind of high where your mind feels super sharp, your digestion feels great, right, and you feel just this this weird form of like energy that feels like I said euphoric, and then days 6 and 7 were a little bit harder because I was already lean to begin with. But yeah, so 3 days is kind of like my sweet spot now. I don't really do 7 days all that much, but it's one of those things that I do once or twice a year, just kind of like a mental discipline thing of like giving my body a break from food and also testing my limits of like, it's like getting on a cold plunge, right?
Yep.
It sucks, but it's, the benefit of like saying I did this hard thing is helpful when it comes to doing other hard things in life.
Yeah, and I would imagine having done the Fit to Fat to Fit that these challenges aren't as difficult as some things you've done in the past, right? You can tell yourself, I've done things that are harder than this. Like, shut the fuck up and just do it. Stop trying to compromise with yourself. Just do it. Go for that walk. Shift your headspace. Do you tell yourself that?
Yeah, and in certain ways I do. I kind of I've come from a background of like playing football and wrestling, which are really, really hard sports, right?
Yeah,
And I
totally.
used to have a negative self-talk when it came to doing hard things, like kind of like self-hate, like shut up, don't be a bitch, like just do it. And I think that's good in the short term. Like that can definitely get you through some hard things because that's the way like my coaches talk to me, right? To motivate me to like, do the hard things in those sports. As I've gotten older and I have kids now, I have 2 daughters that are teenagers. I've really shifted like of how I talk to myself, because I think that rubs off on our kids more than people think. And so I tend to talk to myself differently and more of in a positive way, where I can still motivate myself to do the hard things. Like, hey, like for example, 4 years ago, I ran 100 miles in 24 hours, right? Which sucks, but it was one of those things where I'm like, I'm going to do this hard thing. I'm going to train for it. And so I had to have like a inner dialogue between me and my body, like, hey, I know this sucks, but we're gonna fucking do this thing, and we're gonna push ourselves to our limit, and then afterwards we're gonna rest and eat a donut and take a nap. Like that's
Yeah.
like how I negotiate with my body now, instead of like, you better fucking do this, like, and just like talking down, because I think that negativity kind of has some effects that maybe spill over into other relationships in my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And do you think that is potentially because you have daughters, right? If you had sons, maybe you'd still have that hard, mean to yourself attitude.
That's a good question, man. I haven't thought about that in a while, but there's probably some truth to that, because I think as men, if I had sons, I would probably be, talking to them differently. I think girls are completely different,
Yeah.
totally different approach. And so, yeah, that might be different if I had boys. Although with boys, I would also maybe teach them the lessons that I learned from, like, hey, if you're going to be negative to yourself, like I said, that can get you through some hard things in sports. But as a young teenage boy, you don't understand the effects that it will have, like, and carry over. Like, for example, let's say you're a typical teenage boy, you're playing sports, and you miss a tackle, or you strike out or something, and then you go and you cry and you hate yourself and you're embarrassed, and you just fucking wish that you didn't do that, right? And that carries over into like pushing friends away, pushing family away, being mean to your mom, being mean to your sisters, or just being mean because you're in a bad mood. It carries over into other aspects of your life. So I would probably have a talk with my sons about, like, hey, if you're going to do it this way, here's the effects that it has, and if you can find a healthier way to do it, then I would probably try and teach them that way. But yeah, there's probably some truth where I'm a little bit easier on my daughters than if I had sons.
No, Drew, I want to talk a little bit about your own podcast. What was the reasoning in starting a podcast, and how has that journey been?
That's a good question. So I started my podcast in 2015, which has been almost 10 years, which is crazy. And I first got tucked into it from another friend of mine, Sean Stevenson, the Model Health Show, I think is the name of his podcast. And he's a good friend of mine. He had me on. He's like, dude, you should start your own podcast. And I'm like, yeah, maybe I will. And then before you know it, I pulled the trigger on it, and I've had it going for like 9 years now. Because I feel like I said, I'm not your typical gym bro, like fitness dude that just talks about like having muscle and getting the body. I feel like because of Fit2Fat2Fit, doing it once in 2011 and again in 2020, and my own life experiences have really humbled me to where my approach to health and fitness is a little bit different. It's more so on the mental and emotional side, with a little bit of focus on the physical side, because I feel like that's where people struggle. And so I know my approach is a little bit different. So my podcast allows me to talk about those other things, where maybe sometimes I'll talk about spirituality, I'll talk about food addiction, or other addictions that kind of keep people from becoming the best version of themselves. So if I just focus on health and fitness, I think it would just be another fitness podcast. But it's my platform, and I'm grateful to be able to say the things that are true to me.
In 9 years of your show, what's been your favorite part of just having it? Has it been the networking or getting to talk to amazing? Like, what is your favorite thing about your show?
That's a great question. I would say the people that I've met because of my podcast has been a huge benefit. Like, if you were to just ask someone that you wanted to, like, speak to, and you didn't have a podcast, and you're like, hey, can I just borrow an hour of your time to ask you a bunch of questions? Most likely they'd say no. But if you're like, hey, I have a podcast, I've had these other guests on, I'd love to have you on, it's more acceptable in our society to be like, yeah, I'll jump on your podcast. Like, let's do it. Right.
Yep.
And it's a way to connect and network with some amazing people. And I think that's what I love about it, to be honest with you.
And you're 400 plus episodes in too, so you've had a great deal of networking. And now, at what point did you begin getting invited onto other shows and kind of sharing more about your message from, an exterior perspective?
Dude, I started doing podcasts in 2011, before podcasts were a big thing. And some people who had podcasts back then had me on from the very beginning, talking about my first Fit2Fat2Fit experience. And it's just always I've kind of like continued that on. I've been, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of podcasts now. And I still do them to this day. And yeah, the amount of like people that I've met and the networking that I've had has been, I'm very grateful for all of that. So yeah, it's been a blessing in my life, I would say.
And Drew, in 10, 20 years when you're 50 or 60, do you see yourself ever gaining the weight again and losing it?
That's a good question. Here's what I'll say about that. And the reason I'm hesitant to say no right away is because after 2011, when I did it the first time, I said no right away. Like, never again. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. I can't believe I did it in the first place, but I would never do it
Yeah.
again. And then in 2020, I retracted that and ended up doing it again. So I'll never say never, but in the foreseeable future, with who I am today, I don't see me ever doing it again, like when I turn 50, just because it takes a toll on your body and your mind.
Yeah, and health
Yeah,
complications. You never know what could happen.
exactly. And your relationships. And as you get older, you are kind of rolling the dice. It's riskier, I would say.
Totally.
So I don't foresee myself doing it again, unless I had some kind of tremendous like experience that would radically transform my mind to like say you got to do this again. But yeah, I don't foresee myself doing it
It
again.
kind of reminds me of the guy who ate McDonald's every day for like that month.
Morgan Spurlock.
Yeah.
Yeah, supersize me.
Supersize me. Correct.
Recently,
Yes.
he passed away this year actually from cancer.
Wow. I'm sure that could have been related.
Right.
Maybe.
Well, you know what? So, as these health monitors advance, right? You have the Whoop. I see you wearing an Apple Watch. You have the Fitbits. You got a Whoop also.
A Whoop and an Apple Watch.
So
Yeah.
there you go. So, you know, if you were to do it again, I would imagine in 2011 you didn't have that privilege, but now you could really see what you're doing to your body from a very internal perspective.
Were you
Every
using the Whoop in
second, yeah.
2020?
Yeah, I was using the Whoop in 2020, plus blood work, plus some other metrics that were really cool, like a continuous glucose monitor, things like that, like technology that we didn't have in 2011. And we'll see what we have 10 years from now. But like,
Totally.
it is really cool, intriguing data for people to kind of like, follow along. And that's why I did it again in 2020, was because in 2011, social media wasn't what it is
Uh-huh.
in today. So live streaming stories, those kinds of things. There's so much more data to show people, and people could see a day in the life of like every single day. Like, oh, what's Drew eating today? Like, how's he feeling today? What's he going through today? Like, people could check in through it. Versus in 2011, it was like a blog post every once a week, or
Yeah.
a YouTube video of like a food challenge that I did. So it wasn't really the same. But anyways, yeah, that's the reason why I did it again in 2020. And the technology is very interesting data for people to kind of like follow along with.
I would agree. So with your early content, because you were early to the content game as well. Who's filming these videos of you just eating, eating, eating?
So in 2011, it was my wife at the time.
Okay.
We got divorced in 2014, 2015, but she would film all that content. And then in 2020, I luckily had a film crew, but I did have a girlfriend at the time, who would also film some of the stuff. But I did have a videographer kind of follow me throughout, just because it was so much easier to do it that way. There's so much content that hasn't even been seen yet, to be honest with you. Just because I don't have the time or resources to have someone to go through it all and make it into a documentary. But I do have all that content.
Do you have stretch marks?
Good question. I got a little bit of stretch marks after my first journey in 2011, but it's not very noticeable. Like you wouldn't really notice it. I kind of notice it, but it's not like very prevalent. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess as you lost the 75 pounds, got back into your normal-ish, lifestyle, fitness, what does a typical day in the gym look like for Drew Manning?
That's a good question. So right now, I go through phases. Like sometimes, like for example, the past 6 months, I've been paddling, which is a popular sport here in
Yeah,
Hawaii.
that's blowing up.
Yeah, there's six men in a canoe, and we're racing against other teams with 6 men in their canoes. And so that's something that's a totally different approach. So working on endurance, but also a lot of upper body strength and core strength, super important for that type of sport. And then now I'm kind of entering more of an endurance phase for running. Like I'm getting into more running. Maybe I'll do a half marathon or a marathon coming up. So that's going to, increase the amount of like running I'm doing. But I'm always doing minimum, I would say 3 days a week of strength training heavy resistance training, no matter what phase of life that I'm in, just because I think for me, I don't want to lose too much muscle mass as you age. If I could hold on to as much muscle mass as I can, it's going to pay off in the long run as I get into my 50s and 60s and 70s to kind of maintain, that health that we all want to have, the quality of life as we get older. So I don't want to lose too much muscle mass. Like today, I went to the gym and did lower body, and I kind of focused on my posterior chain. So my lower back, my glutes, my hamstrings, and my calves is the way I kind of split up my legs, and then I'll do more of a front facing leg day, which is mostly quad heavy. So a lot of front squats and Bulgarian split squats and leg press machines, heavy sled pushes. Sled
Bulgarians are brutal.
Yeah, they are pretty. So
They're brutal.
yeah.
So I'm gonna tell you the situation I'm currently in. So I weigh anywhere from 170 to 175, and I would like to put on 10 pounds here, and no given amount of time, but let's say within a year. Like to put on no fat. I don't want to put on like real fat, but I feel like it's hard to do that without dirty bulking, which I don't want to do. If you were me, what's the best way to put on 10 pounds of preferred muscle in let's say 12 months?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think a lot of people will want to do the same thing where they want to put on the most amount of muscle with the least amount of fat. And it's kind of difficult for someone that's already trained. Like if you're already in shape, you've been training for a long period of time, it's a little bit harder for you. What I would recommend is there is a clean bulking approach, which it is harder. I'll be honest with you, because to chew and swallow, more chicken and broccoli is so much harder than it is to get in, a lot of pizza or, French fries, like more calories, more calorically dense food on a dirtier bulk. So it is a little bit more difficult. And that's where things like protein shakes, mass gainers can kind of come into play, but that might affect your digestion. It might affect, all kinds of things. So for me, meal prep is probably the most important thing you could do. So prepping your food once or twice a week, having all your protein and your carbs prepped beforehand, and then focusing on, like I said, healthy fats, like having avocados, maybe some coconut, some butter, some salmon, some healthier fats into your diet, just to up those calories. And then, for me, like getting in protein when you can. Like for example, I put about 40 grams of protein in my coffee every morning, just to kind of sneak in a little bit more protein. Post workout, I'll have like a protein shake with 2 scoops of whey, maybe another 10 grams of collagen and a bunch of berries. That's like my go-to post-workout meal. And then the rest of the day is whole foods.
That sounds like it'd be in the bathroom all day.
Yeah, see, it depends on you and your digestion and what your body.
But the other problem, Drew, is that I feel like when I overeat, I feel somewhat not lethargic, but I'm like dragging. So I like to maybe go for a walk. As I get busier, I feel like that's not an option, right? To be eating and then having to walk it off all day. There's only so many hours in the day. So that's what I find that it's going to be very challenging, that if I continue to eat, I don't have the proper energy to, prepare for podcast or work or go to the gym, whatever the situation may be.
So here's a couple hacks, and this is what you're gonna have to do. Is if it's your number one priority, you're gonna figure out a way to do it. You're gonna figure out a way to hit your macros. You're gonna figure out a way to get in, those that walk. Like for example, you have to wake up earlier, or buying a walking desk, like a walking stand-up desk from home, just to be able to walk and work at the same time instead of having to take time off and go walk for 10 to 20 minutes to help you digest. Because I remember those days of like eating and being in a caloric surplus and then feeling lethargic while your body digests the food. It's a lot of energy for your body to do that. So you have to remember to put on the 10 pounds of muscle. That's going to be like a full-time job for you to like be dedicated. And then not only that, then to maintain that muscle is also going to require you to eat a lot of calories as well to maintain that amount of, lean muscle increase. And that's if you go the natural route, right? And then, if you want to get into the world of, these other not natural.
Uninterested.
So
it's gonna be harder for you.
Drew, and how many calories would you recommend Merrick eat? 3,000, 4,000? How many calories do you have to eat to gain 10 pounds of muscle over a year? If you're
Well,
eating just say meat, rice, fruit, veggies,
I know
everything.
it depends on like, where you're currently at, like how many are you currently eating, what's your current body weight
I
and
would say
I'm
Merrick
eating
and
like
I,
2 big meals a day. Like
but I would say
honestly,
we probably burn around 2,000 to 2,500 calories a day. Because we used to wear the whoop also.
Okay, so
So
I
it
wouldn't
was
worry
around there.
about how many calories you burn. Like the calorie burn on even the Whoop isn't the most accurate, I would say.
Okay.
Don't worry about that. I would just worry about, okay, what's your basal metabolic rate? If you can go get a DEXA scan now. You said you eat 2 meals a day.
2 big ones, maybe a little snack, but pretty standard. I'm not eating all day long.
Yeah. Okay. So that's going to come at a cost. That's a little bit harder because
Yeah.
you only get in so much protein at each of those meals. So let's say your goal is to get in 200 grams of protein a day, which is kind of what I'd recommend if you're 170-ish and you're trying to put on 10 pounds. 100 grams of protein for each meal is freaking tough, even for me to consume. So breaking up into 3 meals or 4 meals maybe might do you better to get in the adequate amount of protein that you need without having to feel lethargic all day long. So if you did, 4 meals at 50 grams each, that's going to be a little bit easier to stomach that versus 2 meals at 100 grams each. So that's just kind of like either way, either path you choose is going to come at a cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
my protein is definitely there, but it's really just the carbs and potato. I don't eat many carbs, honestly. Maybe I'll have a sandwich for lunch, but it's really a
But
lack
you're,
of
Merrick, you're
carbs.
probably not getting 200 grams of protein in a day.
No, I'm not, probably not, but I'm definitely getting more than most. Most of my meals come from protein. Lunch, dinner, even breakfast, which I don't eat very often, but a lot of protein, a lot of fruit as well.
if your number one priority is to put on muscle, I would recommend doing most of your carbs post workout. So, like I said, the berries and the protein shake is kind of like a quick, easy way to just because the carbs are going to help you um, most likely build muscle quicker. But it also might make you feel lethargic if you have a lot of carbs throughout the day. But just specifically timing your carbs with the protein, pre and post workout, that's when your body's going to utilize the carbs to help you build that muscle. But yeah, your performance might not be the best. Your mental clarity and cognitive function might take a hit on like a heavy leg day. So you have to like weigh the positives and negatives with each of your decisions of like, okay, if I really want to put on muscle, it's going to come at the cost of like meal prepping all your food, maybe spreading out your meals, getting more protein, and maybe going for a walk or buying like a standing desk at home and just to be able to move through that food that you just ate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's yeah, without doing it cleanly is very difficult, it sounds, because you have to eat a lot. You have to eat a lot of pure foods. And what would you work out? Like you'd lift weights 5 to 6 times a week with that program?
Yeah, I would say minimum 4, upwards of 5, maybe 6, but that's kind of, you're going to need to rest as well because that's the key to building muscle is recovery. If you're working out too much, I feel like you're not going to get as much out of your workouts if you're working out 6 days a week.
Yeah. So let's change subjects then. Let's talk about sleep, right? Rest. How do you utilize and manage sleep properly? So you have the Whoop and Apple Watch. You know damn well how you're sleeping every night. What are some sleep hacks that you've come across for yourself here recently?
I work with a lot of clients that struggle with sleep, and sleep is one of those things that is so underrated when it comes to health and fitness that a lot of people skip past it and they're like, oh, I'll just grind. The problem is that you're doing yourself a disservice in the long run because you're burning the candle at both ends when you aren't sleeping well. But hacks, here's some hacks that I recommend. It's like I'll start with my 3-2-1-12 rule. So the 3-2-1-12 rule is 3 hours before bed, no food, unless you're trying to bulk up, but you might need to like shorten that window to like 1 or 2 hours. 2 hours before bed, no liquids. You're not waking up to pee in the middle of the night. 1 hour before bed, no screen time. That's a pretty everyone knows that, but it's hard to follow just because of the world we live in. And then the 12 is no caffeine past 12 p.m. or noon. And that won't disrupt your sleep because caffeine has like a 4 or 5 hour half-life, meaning like every 4 hours, half of that amount of caffeine is in your system. So cutting all your caffeine off at noon is kind of the best way to set yourself up for sleep. Other sleep hacks: keep the room cool, right, around 60, I would say 65 to 68 degrees. Getting outside first thing in the morning, getting some sunlight on your skin, on your eyes, to kind of reset your circadian rhythm is also important. And then from there, I mean, those are probably the most important things, for sleep hacks. And then when you get into like supplementation, it's different for each person. You know what I'm saying? Like I only sleep supplements, some of them work, it's about 50-50. Some of them work and some of them don't. And for some people they work and for other people they don't. So
to each their own, in a sense.
yeah, so you need to do some experimenting to figure out what works best for you to get into the most deep sleep possible. Because then that's where you're gonna recover. The better you can recover, the better you can push yourself. So like if you recover faster, that's why I'd also recommend like a sauna post workout to help your
sauna.
Big on that. Yeah.
Get a sauna post workout. Because if you're recovering faster, you can push yourself harder in the gym and get those gains that you're trying to get.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah, Drew. So one more thing, Drew. You got your conscious fitness retreat upcoming in Hawaii. Tell us and our listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I had my first one in August, and the whole conscious fitness idea is basically everything that I teach is when people can come here and experience for about a week in Hawaii, me coach them through this conscious fitness approach, which includes, a physical aspect, like we'll be going on hikes, we'll be, doing some partner workouts and beach workouts while they're here on the retreat. But the conscious side of it is, teaching them breath work, teaching them tools and modalities that help them regulate their nervous system. Because here's what happens is it's mostly geared towards people that maybe are looking to, transform their mindset. Like we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, they don't really know how to overcome those patterns or behaviors that they've been stuck in for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And now they're like, okay, I want to make a change. How do I freaking do this? A lot of it has to do with regulating your nervous system, because a lot of people live in what's called fight or flight, which is your sympathetic nervous system. And that's when people are stressed out, they're triggered, they're overwhelmed with like life situations, or they live a very stressful life. And when you're stressed out all the time, you're triggered all the time, in those moments where you're like trying to stay consistent with exercise, or those moments where you're trying to stay consistent with your diet, if you're reacting from a place of overwhelm, it's so much easier to gravitate towards the comfort food, right? Or the comforts of life, instead of do the hard work that you're supposed to do. But if you can learn how to regulate your nervous system and get into what's called a parasympathetic state, which is your rest and digest, and from there, you can make better decisions when it comes to diet and exercise versus just being in a reactive state all the time. And so that kind of puts you into more of a conscious state where you're present and you can make better decisions about your life from there. And that's why I teach people breath work, and they get to experience that on the conscious fitness retreat, as well as some other cool modalities that we teach them while they're here. And then, of course, we go see the beauty of this island, some waterfalls, some beaches, a lot of cool, fun excursions that we do as a team. And it's like 10 to 15 people, so it's smaller, more intimate. And the next one coming up in October is October 14th through 19th, which I think there's like 4 or 5 spots left. And then there's another one coming up in February of 2025 that people can sign up for as well. And that's at consciousfitnessretreat.com.
Oh, it sounds amazing. Hopeful one day maybe to be a part of it. Never been to Hawaii, never yet to meet you in person. So it'd be a two birds with one stone, be an amazing opportunity. Drew, where can our listeners find you and everything you're working on with your podcast, your book, and all of your content?
Yeah, so it's super simple. It just my social media handles are all the same. Fit2Fat2Fit. So Fit2Fat2Fit on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the things. And hit me up on there. And just like you guys did.
Hell yeah. Guys, thank you very much for tuning in. Drew Manning, thank you for joining the Everything But Politics podcast. See you guys next week.